and the building where Ariana's body was found was a place where the man was thought to have often stayed. All the evidence seemed to implicate Carlos in this heinous crime involving a minor. But in reality, there was no Carlos. Police investigators would soon suspect that Carlos was Alexis Flores. In 2007, this would be confirmed when DNA taken from the Philadelphia crime scene thought to belong to Carlos was matched with that of Flores. However, Alexis Flores had already been arrested in Phoenix, Arizona back in 2004 on a charge of forgery, leading to his deportation back to Honduras. Since 2007, he's remained at large and named in the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives, with the reward for any information leading to his capture increasing from $100,000 to $250,000 in 2023. As of 2024, though, Alexis Flores has yet to face justice for his crime. $250,000 seems like quite a sweet reward for anyone who spots Alexis Flores. But you know what's nicer than $250,000, rookie? How about $5 million? That's the amount the FBI is currently offering for anyone with information on Wilver Villegas Palomino, a man thought to have been involved in a 20-year-long conspiracy to distribute illegal substances from Colombia to the United States. According to the FBI, Villegas Palomino is a high-ranking member of the National Liberation Army, a Colombian insurgency group involved in the ongoing conflict that has swept the country since 1964. The group is classified as a terrorist organization by the governments of the United States, Colombia, Canada, New Zealand, and the European Union. Villegas Palomino is charged with the crime of narco-terrorism due to his role in helping traffic cocaine into the U.S., and given that this criminal activity and the selling of the illegal drug has helped to fund a terrorist organization. According to federal officials, most of the funds obtained by the ELN through drug trafficking is used to help fund terrorist attacks, as well as help them buy political influence and other actions that they conduct in an attempt to destabilize the Colombian government. Given that Villegas Palomino is accused of trafficking drugs through Houston, he's become another new fixture on the FBI's most wanted fugitives list since April 14, 2023. However, he was first indicted in February 2020 by the Southern District of Texas on charges of not only narco-terrorism, but also conspiracy to import cocaine and the international distribution of it. Following the ruling, a federal arrest warrant was issued for Villegas Palomino, but his whereabouts remain unknown. He reportedly often operates under aliases, including Wilver Villegas or Wilver Palomino, or our personal favorite, Carlos El Puerco, which translates to Carlos the Hog. With still no further clues as to where he might be hiding, the FBI has attempted to encourage anyone with information on Wilver Villegas Palomino's whereabouts to come forward, and as of September 2020, are offering a staggering $5 million for any information that leads to his capture. $5 million is certainly a hefty payday, probably more than you'll see as a rookie FBI special agent, but it pales in comparison to the literal billions stolen in a Ponzi scheme by the missing crypto queen herself. I hope you're paying attention, rookie. Remember when I mentioned there had only ever been 10 women on the FBI's most wanted list? Well, here's one still out there, Ruya Ignatova. In 2014, Ignatova introduced the world to OneCoin, her proposed rival to the original longest-lasting and most well-known cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. Back in 2016, interest in cryptocurrency was at an all-time high, with investors in an excited frenzy throwing heaps of money at what they saw as a new opportunity to be even more greedy. Make even more money. Garnering attention with OneCoin, Ignatova pitched it as a Bitcoin killer that would become big enough to overshadow the rival cryptocurrency completely. But in reality, OneCoin was a highly fraudulent Ponzi scheme. Early investors were being paid with the money being funneled into OneCoin by newer investors. It was also considered a pyramid scheme since more and more investors were being roped in with no proof of the product's existence. And all the while, Ruya Ignatova was pocketing plenty of that sweet investor capital. OneCoin stole approximately the equivalent of $4 billion since its launch in 2014 from investors all across the globe. Naturally, this landed Ignatova and the rest of the leaders of OneCoin in scalding hot water, with most of them being apprehended by the authorities. Her brother Konstantin Ignatova pled guilty to committing fraud and money laundering charges relating to the OneCoin scheme. But Ruya Ignatova has still managed to avoid facing any justice. Thanks to someone tipping her off that the police were taking an interest in looking into OneCoin back in 2017, she was able to disappear. Since then, she's been charged in absence with all kinds of fraud imaginable and found her name on the FBI's most wanted list as of June 2022. For a brief time, there were rumors that Ignatova had been murdered aboard a yacht in the Ionian Sea at the behest of a Bulgarian drug lord back in November 2018. This was allegedly to conceal the drug lord's involvement in OneCoin and resulted in Ignatova's body being dismembered and thrown overboard. However, as of 2022, the FBI believes she is still alive. More recently, it seemed like Ignatova had resurfaced in 2023 when a luxury London penthouse she bought, yes, with funds from her fake cryptocurrency, went up for sale. Some suggested that Ruya Ignatova could have been orchestrating the sale of the £12.5 million four-bedroom penthouse that she had filled with expensive artwork and designer clothes before she was forced to go into hiding. However, her name only continued to be associated with the property thanks to UK transparency laws, which meant that she had to be named as the previous owner. Sadly, for anyone who lost their money in Ignatova's crypto scam, the reward for any information on her whereabouts is only $250,000. Chump change compared to the amount she made by duping investors. Eat your heart out, Razzle Khan. From a crypto scammer to a North Carolina killer, another name on the FBI's most wanted list with a hefty $250,000 price on his head is Alejandro Rosales Castillo. This 25-year-old fugitive might be the best argument for never dating your co-workers after he took the life of a former girlfriend when he was only 17. Back in 2016, Castillo worked in a Show Mars restaurant in Charlotte, North Carolina, alongside Truc Quan Lai Li, known to her friends as Sandy. The pair of them dated for a short while, during which time Castillo borrowed some money from Sandy, which he never paid back after the two of them split. Now with a new girlfriend, Amia Feaster, Castillo texts Sandy in August of 2016 telling her he wants to repay the money she loaned him. The two meet up, with Feaster bringing Castillo to the place they'd agreed. But instead of repaying Sandy, it's believed that Castillo forced her, possibly at gunpoint, to withdraw all the money from her bank account at an ATM, which totaled to the last $1,000 she had left. Afterward, Castillo was thought to have driven Sandy to a wooded area and shot her in the head, leaving her body in a ravine before stealing her car alongside Amia Feaster. Castillo and Feaster drove to Phoenix, Arizona, and eventually crossed the border into Mexico. However, in October that same year, Feaster reached out to her mother and was extradited to the US and then arrested. According to her, Castillo had just vanished one day, even though she had no idea where he went. Investigators believe Castillo could still be in Mexico somewhere and could even be in continued contact with friends or family back in the US. As I said, dating your co-workers rarely works out. Are you married, Rook? I only ask because if you learned anything in this line of work, it's that marriage can be more trouble than it's worth. Sure, you might end up moderately happy for the rest of your life, maybe even with someone you like. But that's just the best case scenario we're talking about here. Worst case, well, you might not even get to enjoy the honeymoon period. On the 11th of May 2012, Estrella Carrera married Arnaldo Jimenez at Chicago City Hall. After sharing a celebratory dinner with family and friends, the couple set off to dance the night away at a club, eventually leaving around 4 o'clock. Then on the way back, things got heated, and not in the way they usually do on a wedding night. The newlyweds got themselves into an argument which resulted in Jimenez fatally stabbing his new wife multiple times in his car. He then dragged her body into the apartment and left her dumped in the bathtub to bleed out, still wearing the silver dress she had worn when the two of them had been married mere hours earlier, less than a full day after the wedding. Estrella had been the mother of 2 children, a 9-year-old daughter from a previous relationship, and a 2-year-old son she'd had with Jimenez. When she didn't arrive to pick the children up from her family the next day, something was clearly wrong. She was reported missing to the police and her body was discovered the following day, May 13, 2012. There had been no sign of forced entry, and Jimenez was nowhere to be found. 3 days later, he was charged with first-degree murder, and both a state and federal warrant for his arrest followed not long after. But despite his car being found on his brother's property in September 2012, with Estrella Carrera's blood inside, nobody has seen or heard from Arnaldo Jimenez since the murder took place. The FBI believes he might be hiding out in Mexico, suspecting that his brother drove him there in his car and left him there. Just like many others who are still at large, the FBI increased their initial reward for any information leading to Jimenez's arrest from $100,000 to $250,000. And yet still his whereabouts and the whereabouts of the numerous other names on the most wanted list currently remain unknown. Now check out 50 insane declassified FBI secrets you didn't know, or watch this video instead. Did you know some of the most vile, sadistic, warped killers in history got away? Most of them you won't have even heard of. Some of them right now could be living in a town near you, watching you, stalking you. And if two hardworking former detectives are right, they're conspiring to plan your murder on the dark web. This is for real. You'll hear about this underground group of modern American killers in due course, but before we talk about the present, let's look at the past. The New York Ripper murders. Many serial killers enjoy being front-page news. They thirst for the attention, which, as you'll see throughout this video today, is very problematic for society as a whole. Perhaps no one has had more attention than Jack the Ripper, the unknown maniac that worked at a time when London was the center of the media world. His story has been told a quadrillion times, and it seems he might have inspired copycat killers. Between March and May of 1915, the Ripper came back to life, although he was now called the New York Ripper. He brutally killed two young folks in some East Side tenements of Manhattan. Only 27 years after Jack did his business in London, stories of the New York Ripper filled the American press, leading to angry mobs taking the law into their own hands. The Brooklyn Daily Times said there was a ghetto Ripper. People read that a lunatic was on the loose. This caused panic in every household in this mostly poor area. This new Ripper taunted police with letters signed Jack the Ripper, saying he would kill again at random. 100 cops were soon assigned to the case. What's shocking is the Ripper wrote letters to the mothers of the victims. In one letter he wrote, "Dear Mrs. Murray, I really feel sorry for you, but when the excitement cools off again some evening after dinner, I'm going out to kill again. You must understand that I must see blood and cut flesh." So Jack the Ripper, or someone like Jack the Ripper, chose New York City as his hunting ground. The press sold newspapers while the public lost its collective mind. Soon, a news report stated, "Man mobbed as Ripper." It explained that a cop had to draw his gun to stop the mob from killing the man. Another story talked about a man who was seen hanging around outside Lafayette Street School. 100 students chased him down. It was a delirious time, full-on mass hysteria. For Italians, then mostly quite new to the city, it became a perilous time after a cashier who'd sold one of the victims some milk before she was killed said she'd seen a foreign-looking man who she said looked Italian. Some newspapers then discussed these new immigrants and their alleged strange customs. The New York Tribune wrote, "It's well known that among certain ignorant immigrants from the south of Europe, there is a superstitious belief that by sacrificing a little girl, they can be cured of certain complaints." This immediately put Italians' lives at risk from the mob, even though the story was based on nothing but an idle rumor. Alas, the New York Ripper was never found, and things eventually calmed down. The next killer deserves a place in the serial killer hall of infamy. If there was such a thing as the Ripper's Ripper, it would be this guy, the worst of the worst, the Cleveland Torso Murderer. The story of this very real Ripper takes place around the southeast side of Cleveland, Ohio, in an area that was known as Kingsbury Run. That's why the killer was also referred to as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. The killer gained his nickname after his custom of dismembering all of his victims, 7 men and 5 women, who were all found in pieces here, there, and everywhere. The hand that killed them obviously knew a lot about anatomy, just as Jack the Ripper had. As happened in London, the Cleveland Ripper chose poor, disenfranchised people as his victims. Modern researchers have called such people less dead because when they're dead, they don't matter as much as other folks with a higher social status. The Kingsbury Run area was then known as the Hobo Jungle, famous for its gambling dens, raucous brothels, vagrants, booze, and nightly punch-ups. It was one of the so-called Hoovervilles, depressed and often violent shantytowns that popped up all over the U.S. during the era of the Great Depression. Still, the authorities did try to get the man. They even put Elliot Ness on the case, the leader of the so-called Untouchables that went after the illegal booze maverick Al Capone during Prohibition. It was the sheer gruesomeness of the case that compelled the U.S. government to send their best man. In September 1934, a woman who was in her mid-30s was found. Well, her torso and thighs were, which were reported back then as rotting slabs of human flesh, found on the shores of Lake Erie. 2 fishermen on Lake Erie later said they found her head bobbing up and down in the water. She became known as the Lady of the Lake after a young girl swimming in the lake said she saw a hand waving at her from the water. What's notable is that the coroner, Mr. A.J. Pierce, said there were signs of a preservative chemical on the skin of the victim. Where would one find such chemicals? You'll see soon. It was about a year later that 2 young men were found, each missing their head. One body had been drained of blood. Coroner Pierce said the cause of death was decapitation. The victim was later identified as 28-year-old Edward Andrassy, described by newspapers and cops as a snotty punk who occasionally got involved with prostitution and weed. The other body, which had signs of a chemical preservative on the skin, was not identified. Both men were also missing their manhood. Notably, unlike Jack the Ripper, the mutilations happened while the men were still alive, but the decapitation part was given as the actual cause of death. This was utterly brutal, but cops believed the killer must have drugged the victims first. The Cleveland News at the time had asked, what fantastic chemistry of the civilized mind converted him into a human butcher? In January, June, and July of 1936, more bodies were found, and the signature of the murders was the same. They were headless, and if they were men, they were found missing their genitals. In September of that year, a man tripped over something while trying to hop onto a train. He soon realized it was the upper half of a person's torso. When the police were recovering the other half from a muddy pool nearby, 600 people turned up to watch. The case shook America. Still, the Cleveland Ripper, while arguably 100 times worse than Jack in terms of severity, was not major global news. His story was never printed on thousands and thousands of newspapers or even given the major Hollywood blockbuster treatment. Despite Ness's efforts, including 5,000 interviews, he couldn't get his man. He decided the best thing to do was burn the entire shanty town down, making very poor people freeze!
It's alright, you're getting right in now.
Them right near City Hall in clear view of Ness's office. This was an obvious taunt. Body parts were now being found on local streets. As one writer explained, they were literally tripping over bodies. In 1939, County Sheriff Martin O'Donnell arrested a 52-year-old bricklayer named Frank Dolezal, who was thought to be a potential suspect. He made a confession which some say now was staged. Cops broke 6 of his ribs, after which Dolezal was found dead in his jail cell. That hardly sounded like top detective work. The press then wrote about a mysterious man they called the Dr. X, an alcoholic physician that had lost his mind and eventually his practicing license. His name was Francis Edward Sweeney, a well-known member of an influential Cleveland family, and was the cousin to the U.S. Congressman Martin L. Sweeney. Francis was a veteran of World War I and no doubt suffered from what we now call PTSD. He drank all day, often flying into blind rages. He was crushed by anxiety and depression. He also had